Immediately following our guest speech today, there's going to be a panel entitled Women in Politics. Attending will be Sally Anderson, Lola McAlpin Grant, Kathy O'Neill, Pat Russell, and Marge Buckley.
Realizing the tremendous emotional and physical commitment that you're going to have to make from the time that you do decide to run until the time of the actual election. And that if you are in fact going to ask people to work on your behalf, to support you, to give up many volunteer hours of hard, laborious work on your behalf, that you also have to be the hardest working person in the campaign in really putting out your all emotionally and physically. And I think that everyone in making a decision on whether or not to run has to realize that in many aspects running for office, in my opinion, until at least we change some of the way we go about running for office, is demeaning and it's degrading. And I think you have to have a fairly good concept of yourself, and it's my feeling that the average person would have to have a fairly secure emotional setting that they find themselves in to be able to go through some of the really difficult day-to-day campaigning chores. And give you an example, standing in front of a supermarket by yourself on a cold or windy or rainy, even in California it rains, afternoon, hoping people will take your brochure and having them go by and say, "No thanks, not today." It's a fairly discouraging thing to have happen. I remember at one point someone said, "I'll get you on the way out," and I said, "I might not be here on the way out. I'm running for state senate." So what I think you do have to do is prepare yourself to make that kind of a commitment, and that's hard. Secondly, another problem that I think women have in running for office is thinking, and I don't think this should be discouraging. I think that once you make the decision to run, though, you have to realize that there are certain problems that the public has had in dealing with women candidates. And Sissy Farenthold really referred to one of the ones that I came in contact with constantly, and that was the topic of qualifications. And people expect, if there's an articulate, presentable-looking 30-year-old man running for office, people assume that if he can speak in sentences, he is qualified to run for office. But a woman has to show her professional degrees and the kinds of professional job experiences that she has had. Now, I'm not saying this is not important, but what I am saying is that I think that the electorate has to be educated, and that we have to educate them to understand that they should make it the same expectations of their candidates, be they male or female. And if we are looking, quote, into the qualifications of candidates, that it should be across the board and not only apply to one sex. Another problem that I had was the question of age. And I read an article recently, and it talked about the fact that the average age of men in state legislatures around the United States is 52. Is 32. And the average age of women is 57. So again, that gets back to the fact that people are used to seeing young men run for office. But when a 30-year-old woman has the effrontery to run for office, people again have to, I think, become more accustomed to understanding, again, that if we're going to have people entering equally into all aspects of our society, that men and women at approximate, equal ages can be expected to have the, as Sissy would say, audacity to think of themselves as candidates for office. Another problem that I particularly had is that people, again, expect if they're women to run for office that they are older, that they have raised their children, that they are safely ensconced in high school and have not had any major traumatic family problems, or that they are the single professional woman who is devoting her life to public office. But I don't think, it's really, I think, probably because there haven't been a lot of women, but women in their child-rearing and childbearing years who think of themselves as candidates or as politicians. When you think about it, I think at least half of married women with children are working today in our society. So they are involved in careers, and political life is just one other career. And the public has come to accept the fact that married women with children are working. But what I think we have to do is they do need, I think, more broad-scale education to the fact that those same married women with children who are working can also conceive of themselves audaciously as candidates for public office. When I was running, I have 2 young children. We never used pictures of my children in the campaign brochures because I was afraid that people would look and say, oh my God, what's going to happen to those two darling little boys if she goes and leaves them? And I'm really sorry that I didn't do that. And I think that was a mistake in judgment on my part. And I don't think people should run for office as part of a cause. But if that ever happened again, and since it is the tradition in our American culture for the candidate to parade their family, I wouldn't hesitate to do that. I think that that's some, reconsideration that I have of my own experience. Finally, and I won't hold the microphone, but I would address myself to one other issue, and I mention it because I would think that a number of you have taken the time to come today and have come all week. See yourselves as involved in, quote, the women's movement. And I had some very, very good support from people active in the women's movement in my campaign. But I also came in contact with women who were very interested in the campaign and took a lot of time to be sure that I was really straight on, quote, feminist issues. I remember one very hot Saturday afternoon that Lola Grant and I spent together downtown at an organization bringing together a coalition of all the women's groups in town, and they were interviewing women candidates for office to be sure that they fit in with a, quote, feminist philosophy. And I remember leaving and thinking, if all those 30 women don't get out now and work for at least the equivalent 2 hours that we had to put in going through that grilling, then, it's a waste of time all around. So just thinking intellectually that person is a feminist, and wouldn't it be nice if she won, is not helping the candidate one bit. And my husband has a great deal of respect, as a matter of fact, for the pro-life group who campaigned against me, because he sees them as a group of women who believe in something enough, as he puts it, to get off their asses and do something about it. And really, I think that I bring this up because women who are involved in the women's movement and are interested and want to support women running for office who fit in, whose theories and ideas and legislative goals do hold with the legislative goals of the women's movement, are not going to bring this about by holding meetings telling each other that they hope they win, but rather they have got to go out and deal with the larger public, because that's really how elections are won. Lola, take it away.
In my discussion, I'd first like to give you some idea of what I was deciding to do when I decided to run for the 63rd Assembly District. As you probably know, that seat had been occupied by Yvonne Brathwaite Burke, and she had won an election the first time she ran out against a very conservative, white, male, older individual. I don't think it was very difficult for a lot of people to vote for her if they were liberal at all. I think the difficulty came in seeing her as a young black woman at that time. But unfortunately, the time that I ran into some very unique prejudices, I feel, that I had to try and overcome in my speeches and in my contacts and in getting people to work in the campaign. And it boils down to this. It wasn't a problem with respect to accepting me as a woman candidate, I don't think. What they had a problem with in my area, and I must say that I did get a lot of support, so I'm not saying that everybody felt this way, but some of the problems that I did run up into were the fact that I was a black female running against a number of black males for this position. That particular district was pretty much divided, half and half, between whites and blacks in the community. But it was interesting to have blacks come up to me and ask me why I would run against a black male, you see. And wasn't I dividing the vote, the black vote? It seems to me that I was not trying to run necessarily as a black candidate. I was trying to run as what I considered a qualified candidate. I felt I was qualified because of my legal background, because of my involvement, because of the issues I felt were definitely in need of attack, and some concerns that I had about the fact that women were not involved as much in politics, and I wanted to try and preserve a woman in the assembly. We were losing a woman, and I wanted to see that we got another woman in that seat. I felt that I could come as close as as possible to similar qualifications that my predecessor had. So that was why I was running. It was no attempt on my part to run against a black male and knock a black male out of a position. But this, unfortunately, was one of the things that I ran into. Now, some of the women in supporting a candidate, you would think women are divided in their support of a candidate. They're either totally committed or they're not. They are not, if they're totally committed, that means that they support you. That doesn't necessarily mean that they come out and work in the campaign, but that does mean that they support you, and it will mean that they will at least make telephone calls and try and help as much as they possibly can. I did find that to be very helpful. But those that weren't helping, the questions that they would raise were things like, how can you run against this handsome fellow? You don't know what it's like to try and answer a question like that. Yeah. The fact that he's handsome doesn't make him qualified to hold office. The fact that he's not even so handsome doesn't make him qualified to hold office. What makes a person qualified to hold office is a real commitment to the people that they intend to represent. Whether you agree on every single issue or not, it really doesn't matter. If that person is committed to trying to bring leadership to that community, then that person is the one that should be elected. Now, I don't know if she was trying to tell me she didn't think I was so good looking. I'm not too sure just exactly what the point was, but this was the kind of thing I ran up against. Another problem that I ran into were the males that were questioning why I was running. It was interesting that most of the males that were supporting me could not care less about the fact that I was a woman. They were concerned about my position as a lawyer and my involvement in consumer protection, my involvement in women's rights, and all of these things. And I had a lot of labor support. I had an awful lot of the women organizations supporting me, and I'm very pleased to say that. But those males that did not seem to support me were concerned about my children and the fact that I was running as opposed to my husband, and the fact that I had the nerve to suggest that I was going to live in Sacramento if I won office and to take my children with me, or if I had even the other possibility of commuting back and forth from Sacramento, what about the kids during the day? And I don't even see my kids during the day as it is. I'm a professional and I have a daycare center for them and I take care of them that way. But their concern was along the lines of trying to make sure that my children were well taken care of. Then, of course, there was the division of blacks, and I think I addressed myself to that to some extent when I talked about the women, but even more so, I would like to address myself to that. I feel that I am in a unique position being both a female and a black, because both groups have similar concerns about having an equal amount of representation in our legislative politics. And unfortunately, I don't think that it's just because a black male is running that a black female should even think in terms of pulling out. If she feels that she can do the job, she should be considered as a candidate, and she should not be considered as a black female candidate. We need more black representation, and there's no doubt about that. But I don't think that lessens my commitment to the black, because I'm committed to women's rights too. And I think that because of the similarity in the problems, that many, many males found it a little bit of a strain for them to support me. Prior commitments. Every candidate that runs for office runs because they feel they can do a better job there. Far too many people came up to me and said, why do you want to leave a nice, calm environment like a law school and run for politics? Why do you want to leave, go that direction instead of going the direction of a judge? Well, in California, unfortunately, either direction I went in, I'd run into the same problems. California has only one black female judge, and they've kept her in the municipal court level for years. They've never elevated her to the position of a Superior Court judge or even considered her for the position of a Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court. So either way, we only had one black female in the Assembly. Either way we go, we need more black women in politics. There's no question about that. We only have 2 in Congress. So the issue of a black female is one that I think is very important. We have a lot to contribute. And I think that this is a way of encouraging more women to consider, black women to consider running into politics. And my prior commitments, as far as I was concerned, I could do more in a legislative capacity than I could do as a judge. But I think you have to make that decision. And then once you make that decision, you have to be totally committed to making the changes. Financial strains. I can't begin to tell you that if you have any ideas about running for office, the financial strains on you personally will be overwhelming. Nobody realizes how much a person individually commits. I know Kathy probably knows, and the rest of you know. If you decide to run for politics, you are giving up your whole salary for 1 year, whatever it is. And you just have to be ready to accept that. And I thank goodness that that my family was committed to helping me out, or I think I would have been underneath filing for bankruptcy. Financial strains are tremendous on the individual person, but it's something worth fighting for, and so I felt I could commit myself, no matter how much it cost, to trying to win this election. And I don't feel that I would have changed my course at all if I had it to do over again. In fact, I hope I'll have it to do over again. Well, just to mention some of the good things that come out of it. The experience of people seeing a woman candidate running for office is one of the best things that can come out of more women running for office. That is what's going to open up the doors. More women committing themselves to running. And I was so glad to be one of those great numbers of women that filed for office this past year. I was very proud of the fact that we had more women running than we've had in years. I was also very happy to know that I could count on people to work for me. I had a tremendous number of people who spent long hours, and even when we lost, we thought that we had done a good job, that we had done something worth doing. And those are the kinds of satisfactions that you get from running for office. Finally, with their commitment to you, you can't help but feeling committed to doing for those people, to putting yourself out as much as you possibly can, to let them know you're going to work. You're not going to let them work any harder for you than you'll work for yourself. So those are the good things that come out of running for office. Thank you very much.
I'm Pat Russell. As people say when I go around from door to door, oh, you're that woman on the Los Angeles City Council. And that is what I am. There are 15 members of the City Council in Los Angeles. It's a full-time job. We have to be in council by law, by charter, every working day of the year at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then we spend the rest of our time when we're out of council in committee meetings or in the districts. We work, most of us, 3 or 4 nights a week and at least 2 or 3 weekends in a month. And I want to say right at the outset that I love that job. I feel it's very rewarding. Before I ran, I anticipated that it would be a lot of hard work and frustrating because I'd worked with city government for a number of years as a volunteer and in the League of Women Voters where I was trying to get issues through. So I anticipated the frustrations which I knew would happen. I really did not anticipate the rewards which I have found, which range all the way from the rather small reward of being able to answer people's questions if their streets aren't getting swept, if they have a local problem with animal regulation, if there's an abandoned house in the neighborhood that's an attractive nuisance and they can't get anywhere on it. You know, one call from a councilman's office and the departments jump. And I'll tell you, that is rewarding to be able to accomplish that. There are larger rewards in some of the major programs that we get through. I have LA International Airport in my district because 1/3 of my district is Westchester, Playa del Rey. A 2/3 is Venice, which includes the Venice canals. And I have more miles of coastline in Los Angeles City than any of our other councilmen do, and that's a heavy responsibility. The third part of my district is the Crenshaw area, which includes Baldwin Hills, Lamert Park, and Hyde Park, which has seen a major ethnic change in the last 15 years. We have in the 6th district, which is nearly 200,000 people, I think nearly all of the urban problems of our present society. So we are kept hopping. I have 12 people on my staff who work in my own councilmanic office, which is true of all of us as councilmen. And I have 2 field offices, one which serves Westchester, Venice, and one which serves the Crenshaw area. That's the nature of the work we do. I got into this office and went through many similar things to what Kathy and Lola are talking about, and some different too. I'm different from them because I'm one of the older ones, and our kids were through their hard ages, and the younger one was a senior in high school when I ran. And this certainly has been helpful to me because they've been out on their own, and I've not been torn by the problems or the concerns. I first ran in a special election in December of 1969. I'm not the first woman on the Los Angeles City Council. I'm the 4th woman, which not many people realize. The first woman was appointed before 1920 when her husband died, and I can't think of her name right now. The second one was appointed in 1957. That's Harriet Davenport, when her husband died, and she was appointed to take his place. Neither one of them ran after they'd served out the remainder of their husband's terms. Roz Wyman, of course, ran, and that's a story that I think everybody here should be proud of, because she came out of college, and as people said, she was a real fresh breath of air when she came onto the council. She achieved tremendous power on the council. She served 2 full terms. When I ran, I was elected in the first special election the city of Los Angeles has ever had. My predecessor had been in office for 25 years. And I knew the last time he ran, it was very apparent that he would not run again. That was in 1967. And frankly, as a good citizen and a community worker, I said, we better look around and see who's going to take his place. And I talked enough about that people said, why don't you go for it? And I found myself open to the suggestion. And when he did retire in '69 with 2 years to go, we knew that he would be retiring, and frankly, we were ready. And we knew that it would be hard to get the city to call a special election, because typically when there is a vacancy, the city council will appoint someone to take the place. My predecessor's deputy had served as a deputy for 16 years, and he all but had the stationery ordered to carry on. I was interested in it, and I talked with other people who were, and we worked on getting the council to call a special election. It became virtually a motherhood issue, and I use that word advisedly, because it was hard to be against a special election if you believe in representative government, and there were 2 years yet to go. And so it was something the media took up, and when the council did vote, it took them 6 months before they did, but when they voted for the special election, the vote was 11-4 for a special election. And that was historic in itself. That was a little bit like going through a primary election to get them to call a special. Nobody believed it could be done. And I want to say this, for those of you who will run or who will be working for people to run, you really, as both Kathy and Lola have indicated, have to believe in yourself that you are a good person, that you should have the job, and that you can win. I had people say to me, Pat, I hope you'll run an educational campaign so that people can learn out of this. And I said, I hope so too, but that's not what I'm after. I'm really in this to win. And I think that is a feeling you have to have if you want to be a politician and if you want to hold office. If you want to educate people, you can do it other ways. But I think you have to believe in yourself, because as the candidate, you are the one who imbues the people who work with you to have the ideas and the energy to work. So I was told by people who would support me that they thought there was no chance for a special election, but give it a try and promise me you'll run in 1971. So we got the special election, and there were 2 of us who really never doubted we would. That was declared in August of 69, and then the special election was set for December 2 of 69. They call it a sudden death election because it was not a primary. It was whoever got the most votes would hold office. Again, I was not expected to win. There were 5 of us who were running. There were 2 women, and there were 3 men. And the man who was the heir apparent really thought he didn't have any problems, and most people didn't either. The wise money, the press, and everybody assumed that that was the way it would go, which in a lot of ways was a help to us. We did win. We won out of 20,000 some odd votes. We won by 620 votes. That was on, of course, a Tuesday night. I was seated the following Monday because of its being a special election. As I say, I have LA International Airport and the Venice canals, which were then very hot issues, which I think we've made real progress on in the meantime. But I stepped in to really a devastating situation in my district. I then had to run for the regular term and start running in less than a year after I'd been in office. And I had really very few of the advantages of incumbency and most of the disadvantages. That was a hard race, a hard-fought race, but I won that time by 4,000 votes. It's a 4-year term, and I'm now in until 1975. It was 3.5 years ago when I started. And the change, the consciousness raising that's gone on in terms of women running for office in our Los Angeles is dramatic. Kathy, you were worried because you didn't picture your children. You know, that was seriously suggested to me that I not show my picture because as Pat Russell, I could run as a man. I said it's pretty hard for me to ever be able to convince anybody I'm not a woman. I don't want to do that. But to this day, I'll meet people who said they thought they voted for a man when they voted for Pat Russell. Even a black man they thought they voted for. The concern I had then as running as a woman, a lot of ways, was would women support a woman? And I think we've seen answers and heard answers from you on this, but it was a scary feeling to me as I would approach some people. I found then, in 69, which was early in terms of the women's movement, that there was solid support and a very strong feeling. There's been a tremendous change in women in 10 years and how they feel about themselves, because I think a woman has to feel good herself in order to support another woman. But I did find a very strong support among both men and women. Since I've been in office, this has grown. I find it's true with my colleagues. I'm well received. I always have liked to think of myself as a pioneer. I really am not one. Those hard fights have been fought for us, in some cases by our grandmothers. I think we need to remember there have been some glorious pioneers in the women's movement, and I've been able to meet and hear some of them speak. In many ways, what we are doing as women now in politics is consolidating and advancing the position of women. Often somebody will say to me, is the most complimentary thing you can say, you know, Pat, I really think you're doing a good job. This comes from men. You're doing a good job, and I think we should always have a woman on city council. And I smile. You know, there is one woman in a runoff right now. We may wind up with 2 women on council in the coming years. One other thing, there's supposed to be women's issues, and I'll mention 2 that we're working on. I don't really accept the idea of women's issues. I don't think, you know, the airport and the canals are very tough, and I don't think they're men's issues or anything else. They really are issues that have got to be resolved for human beings, and that's the way I've worked on them. I can tell you, none of the men have offered to help me on those tough ones, unless I earned their help. But 2 issues that do strike people as women's issues, and which I have worked on, are one is the issue of police women. And that's very hot right now, and I would like very much to have support from any of you and in council or with letters and phone calls when it comes to council on May 17th. Now, I won't say anything more about that now. We can talk about that if you want to in questions. The second issue is that of child care. I really have taken this as my own in the city, and I want to give some leadership not only for LA City, but for what's happening in the state. And as we say in our office, in the nation, you know, we're not shy. But we've started with removing the barriers in Los Angeles. First building and safety, and the next zoning. We had a signal victory last week when we changed the city ordinances in regards to building and safety for child care in the city. It will make a difference to a number of groups who are now struggling, and when we do change the zoning ordinances, which will be more difficult, we will then be making some very important strides for many groups on child care. I do not speak of child care as a woman's issue, although I think it has great importance to women. I do think it's essentially a human issue. Our councilmen, I have urged to work on this and see it as their responsibility, and I think it's something that all of us have to share as being one of the top needs of our country and our civilization, and principally address ourselves to what it means to children. I only want to say finally, you see different patterns among the four of us in the kinds of women who are seeking office. And I think that's something we all have to look at, that we accept different patterns in terms of ages and lifestyles. And we need every kind in office. Thank you.
I think one of the reasons that I was asked to speak here today was because I represent a certain pattern of these four speakers. I ran as a socialist in the Los Angeles city elections for Board of Education Office number 2. My campaign was controversial and unique in many aspects. I was listed on the ballot as a gay feminist activist, which clearly gave the voters an idea of where I stood as far as feminism and gay liberation. Okay, but there was more to it than that. My program was a socialist alternative to what was presented in a supposedly nonpartisan race. In other words, what we were trying to present, and I was a part of a slate of 9 candidates endorsed by the Socialist Workers' Party and the Young Socialist Alliance, what we were trying to present was a socialist alternative to what the supposed nonpartisan candidates were offering. See, I say supposed and so-called because the only nonpartisan candidates that have ever been elected in this city have been Democrats and Republicans. And what we were trying to do was expose this fact. And along with that, one of our aims of our campaign was to come out clearly on the issues that were involved. We supported the women's liberation movement, its demands for total liberation, abortion, child care, especially in the schools, women's studies programs. We had a full list of demands for women's liberation, for gay liberation, for the oppressed nationalities that are struggling in the city, in this state, and in this country. So what we were trying to do was not only expose the fact that this was not a nonpartisan race, that the other candidates and the candidates that get elected in this race are Democrats and Republicans, but what a socialist alternative to that means. Now I want to discuss some of the questions that I got during my campaign, especially the type of campaign that I ran, which was rather unique. A lot of women's groups that I spoke to raised a particular issue. Everything I had to say about feminism, gay liberation, about the population as a whole, as far as taxes, as far as job security, a lot of things they totally agreed with. But feminists especially raised this point with me. Isn't it more important to get the votes? Isn't it more important to get elected, to be out there to win? And in order to do that, you need the Democratic and Republican politicians and the power that they wield behind you. And that was the question, why are you running as a socialist? I mean, it's great that you're a gay feminist activist and you'll be on the ballot that way, but why run as a socialist? So I'd like to discuss that for a minute because I think it's a very important question, not only to gay feminists, but to the women's movement as a whole and to the gay liberation movement, and to any people that are struggling to achieve their rights under this system. See, the reason I ran as a socialist, and the reason that I think that the women's movement has got to take notice of the fact of what the Republicans and the Democrats are doing with the women's movement is the best example I can give. Shirley Chisholm, who ran for vice president in the 1972 elections, she ran for president? Yeah, sorry, she did run for president. She wanted a black man as vice president, that's right. was a feminist, is a feminist, and had a feminist program when she began. I mean, this is one of the examples I can give. What happened and what her strategy was to fight from a position of power for 3 demands: to have a black vice president, to have a woman in HEW, and to have an Indian in the Interior of Indian Affairs. Now, those were her 3 demands. That's what it came down to, and that's what she was going to fight for. Now, to me, that was a democratic strategy for what feminists should get out of the presidential elections in 1972. And to me, that's not a feminist program. In other words, there's another example, and that's the abortion plank in the Democratic Convention. Now, Gloria Steinem and a lot of other feminists across the country fought for that abortion plank at the Democratic Convention. What happened was George McGovern, who was supposed to be the radical maverick of the Democratic Party, who understood women's oppression, agreed with women's demands, he maneuvered his delegates to defeat the abortion plank at the Democratic Convention because it was a little too radical at this time. This is what the Democratic Party has done for feminists. This is what has happened when feminists have tried to run within the Democratic Party. In other words, they're very glad and they're very happy to have women run as Democrats. And they have more women running in the Democratic and Republican Party than ever before. And that's because of the impact of women's liberation. But that's about as far as it goes in practice. Because our feminist program has sort of been pushed to the background. And those are 2 examples of it, but it's been in almost every campaign. No one has come out on abortion. Well, Nixon's position as far as a spokesperson for the Republican Party has been against abortion. He believes in the sanctity of life, except when it's Vietnamese lives. Then, we can kill by the thousands. He believes in the nuclear family, and the child care will destroy that. So this is the 2 alternatives that we have been presented with the Democratic and Republican Party. And I want to go into a little bit why. First off, why they're presenting that. See, I think they're going to get sharper. I think they're going to begin to realize that they can't just run women candidates who are feminists. They're also going to have to begin to support their programs. They're going to have to come out a little bit more on issues, women's issues, that the women's movement demands and throws up and says, this is what we want. See, they're going to get a little bit sharper. But what is their real aim in the end? I mean, who do they represent, and what are they trying to do, the Democratic and Republican Party? And in my opinion, they represent the forces that are totally against women's liberation. They represent American capitalism. American capitalism is an economic system that can't even grant women pay for the labor that they do in the home. They can't grant women equal pay on the piddling salaries that they give men in industry. And the reason they can't is because American capitalism is based on profits. And to make those profits, they exploit people. We happen to be one of those groups of people that they exploit. They don't pay us for the labor that we do in the home. I was just reading in the Times today. If you average it out with a woman with 4 children working in the home, she should make $10,000 a year, and that's at $2 an hour. Now, are we paid that? No, we're paid as little as possible. It comes out of either the husband's salary or a woman has to do 2 jobs. Now, the reason that's set up that way is because it makes profits. I mean, industry gets, and society at large gets a service. They get children, they get homemaking that they don't have to pay for, plus an industry which women are almost 1/4, 1/3 of right at this time. We don't get equal pay for equal work. Now, what if we demanded and these parties granted that? What would it do to our economy? See, our economy is not set up for the needs of women, much less the rest of the population. It's set up to make profits for huge monopolies. And that's what the Democratic and Republican parties represent. And that's the truth. I mean, that's the truth on the job, in the home, and over women's issues. So if the Democratic and Republican parties are going to bend, they're only going to do it for a little while and a little bit. See, and that's one of the reasons I ran as a socialist. And there's another point that I want to represent. See, I think that the women's movement has got to be independent of the Democratic and Republican parties, because they represent our enemies, our class enemies. They want something that we want, something that they cannot grant, and they'll make certain concessions to give us certain things at certain times, no matter how strong we are. But I don't think that that's the way to go. If we buy into that trip of not supporting our own candidates with our own feminist program and try and take power through the Democratic and Republican Party, we're in real trouble. Because all we do is we get betrayed, like we did at the Democratic Convention, like we did with Shirley Chisholm's campaign. What we've got to do is build a movement of our own on women's issues, on women's demands, that is not going to compromise, and is going to fight, and is going to draw more and more women in. And we are not going to sell out our demands or our issues or our needs. And that's the only way that we're going to win our demands. See, and I consider my socialist campaign as independent of the forces that are oppressing women in this society. And I think that the women's movement has got to work to build that kind of movement that confronts the Democrats and the Republicans and the people that they represent, and say, this is what we want. And we can win victories. We won the abortion victory. We can win more victories. But it won't come through the Democratic and Republican Party. It'll come through the strength of the women in this country to get up and say, this is enough. We are human beings, and we don't care about your profits. We don't care about this whole society that's been going on for 200 years. We want our rights. We want equal pay. We want child care. We want that sexist advertising off TV. We want a whole lot of things, and we're not going to stop till we get it, and we're not going to compromise. And the point I'm trying to make is that joining the Democratic and Republican parties, a two-party system that has been set up for 200 years to exploit us, it's like joining your enemy to fight him. And that makes no sense at all to me. Thank you.
The members of the panels will be glad to respond to questions. Could you please stand up when you state them, and the members will attempt to repeat them so everybody can hear them.
The question is, how do you, for those who are interested in going into politics, how do you get an organization going so that you can get workers and money and supporters and endorsements? I think this goes back to something that Pat Russell made reference to, and that is the fact that I think if you run for office, you have to think about where your base is going to be. And I don't think it has to be from a political party. Pat talked about the fact that she's been very active in the League of Women Voters in Westchester. I think your base can be in the consumer movement, it can be in the environmental movement, it can be in the women's movement, it can be in concerned citizens trying to do something about improving education. But I think what you have to do is people who are thinking about running for office have to bring to their candidacy as broad a coalition base as possible. And I think perhaps here I might be taking exception with some of the members on the panel. If in fact the goal is winning so that you can bring about change, and I would say that if I were running, that would be my goal, winning so you can bring about change, because it's my feeling that losing doesn't bring about change, then you have to build coalitions, because what we have to recognize is that although at this point in time we want to strengthen and broaden the base of the women's movement, there is not, presently, at least that I can see in the Southern California area, any area where a woman can win running as a feminist and seeking only the support of those committed to the feminist movement. You're going to be representing all of the people in whatever district you run for, and so to go into a race and having worked in environmental concerns, consumer concerns, education concerns, women's concerns, perhaps fair tax reform, I'm very concerned about opening up the changing campaign finance reform, opening up committee votes in the legislature, and having dealt with people who are interested in that, I think that's one of the ways you get support and endorsements, because people know you care about the things that they care about because you've been working for it. You're just not going knocking on their door saying, hey, I'm a candidate, please come and endorse me.
Can I add something to that, if I may, Kathy? In a sense, you go through a number of mini elections. You go to various groups and you compete with other candidates for the support of a given organization. And for example, we competed for support of Women For, we competed for support of the National Women's Political Caucus, we competed for support of labor groups, we competed for support of church groups, we competed for support of student groups. I mean, every time you go, what you do is you go before these groups and you present your program, the issues that you feel are important to your particular area and to the nation as a whole, and how you feel that you can best achieve this given the fact that you would win the election. You have to be realistic. In order to win an election, you are going to have to convince the people that are voting for you that you represent them. And you're going in my particular race, there were 9 candidates. Some of those candidates are put up. The realism of the elections in this day and age happen to be that candidates can be put into an election who have no intention of winning. One of the candidates has the support of those put-in candidates. It's a given. They get something out of it. Who knows what? I mean, if you're not a party to it, you don't know what they're getting out of it. But there are machines that control a lot of the elections. Now, in 9 candidates, I came in 3rd, and I was saying, in my position, I was free from any particular concerns. I didn't have any commitments to anybody in the sense of promises of positions or promises of some kind of legislation that I would definitely overlook if it came past my way or something of this nature. But those are realities in politics. There are candidates who are put up. There was another woman in my race who had no intention of winning. She was the most unattractive person, and I'm not being unkind, I'm being quite frank with you. She was put in the race just to have another woman's name in that race because they felt that if a woman ran and she was the only woman in that particular election, she could very well win it. So I just want you to know, you have to compete. There are many elections, many M-I-N-I elections that you have to win to get support, money, and endorsements.
Just on how I got support financially especially, is I agree that you have to go to many groups and you have to present a program that speaks to their issues and what you're running on, why you're running, what you're going to do about specific legislation. I think that's very important. In my campaign, I spoke to many different groups and primarily about education. There were many times that I talked just on a general platform with all the candidates, but it was primarily about education. And what most of the groups wanted to hear, almost every one of them, was, how do you stand on this? How do you stand on corporal punishment? How do you stand on women's studies programs? How do you stand on labor, on the teachers' union, on their right to bargaining, that sort of thing? So you go around to these groups and you speak to them about the issues that they're concerned about. And the one thing that struck me the most in this campaign, it was my first campaign, was that most of the candidates gave general outlines of where they went to school, who they were, what they did for a living, that sort of thing, what their education was, but not to the particular issues that were confronting them by each group. Like I spoke to Chicanos, Chicanas, I spoke to black groups, I spoke to women just organized about education, women's liberation groups, gay groups. They all wanted to know specific things. What are you going to do? You have to take a stand, and then you have to draw your support from what your stand is. I mean, people will support you if you speak to the issues, that sort of thing. In that way, you can run an independent campaign. Now, if somebody mentioned something about if you're just thrown into the election, well, I have a feeling that most of the candidates backed by the big parties are just thrown into the election. I mean, nobody knows who they are, and they spend most of the time introducing their wives or talking about where they went to school. I mean, that's what I got. So it was fairly easy for me when I got up and said, let's talk about this, let's talk about that, let's talk about taxes. What do you want to do about these things? This is what I want to do. It was fairly easy to speak to the issues, and that's how I think I got 27,000 votes, is because people were aware of the fact that I was going to do something about the issues, and I didn't say I'm going to do it alone. I think that's a mistake. Just elect me and I'll solve all your problems. I'll just go up there on that 7-member board and, one vote, I'll change everything. No, but I said, if you support me in this election, then you'll support me in what I'm trying to do because I'm representing you, really. And that means that you're going to have to get out there and fight, too. And people related to that. The time has passed where they just expect that they're going to get the representation without getting out there and fighting for it along with their representatives.
I can't add to that. I'd like to hear another question.
On the subject of socialism, and perhaps I didn't understand you quite clearly, but my question is, why does the feminist movement need a particular party? Why do we need socialists any more than we need Republicans or Democrats? I feel that they're all male-dominated parties. They haven't done anything for us yet. So, from what I understand, the socialist camps around the world are just full of men. There aren't very few women that are involved. So why does yours offer something different?
Well, I think you asked two questions. One has to do with the socialist countries around the world, and the other is, why do we need a particular party? And I'd like to answer that because I think maybe you did misunderstand me. See, I'm in a particular party, Socialist Workers' Party. But that's not what I was suggesting to the feminist movement, and that's who I assume that I'm talking to and who I have been talking to all through my campaign, among a lot of other people. And I wasn't suggesting that you need a socialist party to put forth your demands and fight for them. What I was suggesting is that you need to be independent. See, I consider the Socialist Workers' Party has an independent program which encompasses the feminist program. That's why I ran as a feminist and as a socialist. But what I'm saying to the women's movement is that you need to be independent of the Democratic and Republican Party, which represent the forces that have been exploiting us for hundreds and thousands of years. And what I was saying is that independence is very important. Now, I asked feminists to support me as a socialist because I had an upfront feminist campaign, and I also had an upfront gay campaign, an upfront socialist campaign. It didn't change as the election neared. It wasn't going to change after I got elected, and it hasn't changed now. I'm going to demonstrate for every demand that's raised by the women's movement. I'm going to demonstrate for child care, and what type of form that demonstration takes on depends. Whether it's demonstrating in the street, whether it's going to meetings, whether it's meeting with the representatives of that we have elected, supposedly, that sort of thing. I mean, it's not going to stop. That's what I mean by independent and feeling that I could go up in front of the feminist movement and ask for their support, because I'm not tied to the forces that are oppressing this society and women in this society. So what I'm saying to the feminist movement is it's not only the electoral process, maybe I didn't make that clear, but we've got to build a feminist movement that's going to fight for our demands in many different ways, not just through voting at the polls, because I don't think that's changed a hell of a lot in the last 200 years of our country. I think a lot more, like the ending of the war, like the struggle for black liberation, Chicano liberation, for all the struggles of people that are being oppressed in this country. A lot more has been done outside of the electoral process, and I was trying to propose to this group, the electoral process alone is not the way to go, and it's part of the setup that has been sucking in many, many movements to not fight independently for their demands. What scares the government and scares the forces that run this country more than anything else is an independent movement that puts up demands and won't compromise on them. And that's what I was trying to suggest. What I was saying about my campaign is that it is independent of the Democratic and Republican Party, and they're not just two little things that I throw up there. They represent this whole government and this whole economic system.
Yes, but it still is a male-dominated political party, isn't it?
No, I don't agree that it's a male-dominated political party. I agree that it's a political party and it's got men in it. But the reason that I joined the Socialist Workers' Party and the reason I'm a socialist is because I disagree with the economics that set up this system that we live under.
Well, I agree with you on that subject. I think that socialism perhaps is the answer, but my specific question is, does the Socialist Workers' Party have a better track record on feminist issues than the Republicans or the Democrats or the Peace and Freedom Party?
I think my campaign really speaks to that. I'm glad you asked that question. Of course it does. I ran, if you want me to enumerate, I will, on the specific
I think your campaign speeches are, your campaign is entirely separate from the actions of the Socialist Workers' Party in the past as to a track record of having espoused feminist causes.
Oh, no, I don't agree with that. I mean, I'm a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, and the program that I put forth, I tried to say that I was on a slate of 9 candidates. My program, a feminist program, of which 5 of that slate were men, was totally supported by those men. I mean, what the socialist program was in this campaign was a program of the Socialist Workers' Party, and it was a feminist program. It was a program supporting the oppressed nationalities, calling for black nationalism, calling for Chicano nationalism, calling for gay liberation. They were very clear-cut issues, and they were on all my speeches and on all the 9 candidates' speeches. So, I mean, as far as
Of which
male-dominated...
feminism was only a minor part.
Okay, let me just finish. No, see, I was listed on the ballot along with 3 other women as feminists. I happen to be a gay feminist activist. But let me just wind this up because I want to give the speakers a chance to talk. With the whole question of male-dominated party, see, I joined this party and I'm a socialist because I think that this society and this economic system has got to be changed for my liberation as a woman and as a gay. Now, I joined this party. This party and socialists in general encompass a lot of different people. They encompass black people, white people, men, women, Asians, Chicanos, gays, and they're all in this party and they're in many other parties. But what we agree on is the fact that this economic system has got to be changed because we believe, and I believe, that it is directly at the root of my oppression. And that's, if they can agree on that, then that's the people that I want to join together with to fight with. But there is a sort of a separate issue with the women's movement. See, I mean, there are a lot of women that realize that they have a right to abortion, they have a right to equal pay and for equal work, to child care, that may not necessarily believe that we have to change the economic system, but they're willing to fight for those demands. And what I'm trying to say to these women, which I believe are the majority of this country, I'm not being unrealistic, is that they must and they will build a total women's liberation movement around those demands, and that movement will change this country, will win those demands, many of them. Now, I think in the overall perspective, we've got to fight for a socialist revolution in this country,
Okay,
economically.
Thank you.
I'd like to direct a question to Lola McAlpin Grant. If in running for office, if the situation was to occur that you had to make a choice between being more representative of black interests and more representative of women's interests, which choice would you, in your own mind, how at the margin would you behave? Would you feel that you would have to be more representative of black interest or of white interest? I realize.
Being without regard to what artificial reasons there may be, I'm going to be fighting for it. I'm going to be fighting to change it. And I think it's unfortunate that far too many people want to put black candidates in a bag of supporting only black issues. It's like they did with Shirley Chisholm. You were talking about Shirley Chisholm's campaign and the kind of, blackmail that she underwent. Well, I don't think the Socialist Party or any other party did justice to Shirley Chisholm. And I think it's time for this country to become aware of the fact that we cannot look at a candidate and say, I don't know if I'm going to vote for her or him because he might be more inclined to vote for black issues or women's issues or any other issues. Those are human concerns. Anytime there's an injustice in this country that's forwarded or attacking any particular group, I'm going to be the one fighting against that injustice. So if that doesn't answer your question, it's because I don't think your question is a good one.
Okay. Well,
I would like to ask Pat Russell about the police women issue and what's going to happen on May 17th and all about that.
The Los Angeles Police Department was the first department in the United States to hire women. That was over 25 years ago. Within the last 3 years, they've not hired any women in the first place. In the second place, there is very little promotional opportunity. No woman in the LAPD has ever gone beyond sergeant. We've raised the issue in the last year because there has been concern on the part of the police women. And what we come into really is virtually a catch-22 situation. women in the LAPD are not allowed, they go through the academy with somewhat different training from the men physically. Turns out they are among the top sharpshooters, but physically they don't go through quite the same training. They are not allowed then in patrol cars. Patrol car is the basic beginning experience of a policeman in the LAPD. In order to get promotion from into investigator positions or policeman 3, you have to have had patrol car experience. So that if a woman has not been permitted to have that, then there's no way she can be promoted. Now, the council, set up and passed against the chief's wishes the requirement that the department have a pilot project in which they would test women in police cars and determine what kind of training would be needed. The department has countered and come back with a different proposal, which the chief calls unisex, in which he says they will hire women the same as men. They will have to meet the same requirements, which means they have to be 5 feet 8, 140 pounds minimum. And if they can pass that, then they will get the same training and the same promotion. This cuts out about a third to half of the women now on the force, some of whom have served well and done some really remarkable things, from even getting any advance at all. There are women who are 5'4", 5'5". Also, you see what this points to, I think, is a very basic thing in the whole idea in the whole women's liberation movement, and that is that when you see an injustice to women, there's a counter-injustice to men. The 5'8" requirement is really an injustice for men. It very specifically leaves out Oriental and many Mexican people, so that the counter now to the police counter is coming through from a personnel department recommendation, which is that they will at least lower the standard to 5'7", and probably lower than that unless they can prove that that it has to be 5'7". So it's going to put the burden of proof on the police, and it says that all women can be trained and can be advanced to any position in the department. There's very strong feeling about this. If you've read the papers or something, you'll see this from the chief. There is from some of the men. And I think that the issue with policemen, policewomen, brings out a lot of the basic problems between men and women. And as far as I'm concerned, it brings out a lot of the problems in our society and the issue of violence. I think it's important that we have women as police officers, period. And that we not base the meaning of our police department on physical mass and superiority. And when you see that the requirements that the police are putting on it, you see that really is the basis of our police force. So we need support for the personnel department's recommendation, for the personnel committee's recommendation. I frankly think most of the councilmen are quite sympathetic to this, but there will be terrific pressure on them from some of the police officers. And we do need strong community pressure to support the promotion and the hiring of police women. Okay, if you will write to your own councilman or to the president of council, or if you will write to me and say you support the hiring and promotion of police women, that's enough. If you want to be more specific, say according to the recommendations of the personnel department, that you think that the weight and height requirements should be lowered and that women should be able to serve, then I'll make sure that those get around to all of the other councilmen. If any of you could be there in council chambers on Thursday, May 17th, we will have, I think that it will be an interesting session. I understand the chief wants to come and speak.
I'd like to ask each one of you specifically, talking about the financial aspects, what was spent on your individual campaigns and how much money you personally had to put into it. Lola came up with a figure of be prepared to give up your salary for a year, but that, you know, was kind of nebulous to me because I assume you make pretty good money. And which a lot of, you know, again, a lot of women who are trying to run for office really don't. And my second question is to Kathy. I'd like to know what your future political plans are, what you're doing next.
To answer the question about finances, which I think is one of the basic needs for change in society, until we can bring about some public financing of campaigns and some limitation on the amount of money that an individual, an association, a relative, or a corporation can give or loan to any one person's campaign. And I think that this is really necessary for fundamental change in society. And there's groups getting together now to form a statewide initiative for the 74 ballot on that. All right, until that happens and until we've passed campaign finance reform, if we're going to get more women in office, women who are supporting other women have to learn how to raise money. And that's, again, something that, because we don't have many women candidates and women who've been active doing it, that women don't have the experience in doing. It takes an awful lot of energy, and it drains enormous amount of resources from a campaign to put on a dinner. And a dinner will raise $500, maybe. I mean, we're just talking about, a dinner in someone's home that's $10 or $15 a person. And you need thousands and thousands of dollars to run a campaign. So people have to, I think, who are supporting candidates, women have to learn how to get on the phone, both the candidate and their finance chairman, men and women who are supporting them, and learn who has money in the district and in the community who'd be interested in supporting a woman candidate, and call up and say, listen, we need a couple of $100, we're getting out a mailing and we're putting a brochure together, can we count on you? And both the women and the people who are on the woman candidate and the people on the finance committee have to go and learn how to go to people and ask them for money. It was, for me, one of the hardest things that I had to learn how to do. And I remember in the primary coming home and saying to my husband one night, I met 7 people today, and I had to ask 5 of them to give me money and have parties for me in their homes. And 2 of them weren't so sure they wanted to do it. And I had to give them an argument. Now, this is the kind of thing, it's just terribly draining. My campaign, I was very lucky. I raised a substantial amount of money, a lot of it because Gloria Steinem was gracious enough to come out on my behalf, and that raised a lot of money. And I just want to say one thing before passing it on to Lola, and that is to be not too discouraged. We've talked a lot about the difficulties of women running for office, and it's true that I didn't win, but I got more votes than I was on the Democratic ballot than any Democrat has ever gotten in the district, and I ran ahead of the Democratic registration, the percentage of Democratic registration in the district. And what that says is that people on a bipartisan basis are willing to support a woman. So, we've talked a lot about the difficulties today, and that is one of the plus sides, that, I think that people are becoming more supportive in that area.
Kathy, what would give your vote? Because it's heartbreaking, but I think it says a lot, the numbers.
Well,
I think it was 133,000 to 130,000.
Yeah, 133,000 to 130,000. And speaking of third-party candidates, the Peace and Freedom candidate had 5,000, which is just, like 1% or something of the vote in the district, which is not an unusually high vote. But were that, not to have been the case, it's possible
We'd
that
have a woman in the state.
that it would have been different. So it was close, but what I'm saying is there is broad support for women, and women can raise money because, and I didn't have, my husband works, I put like whatever I had to quit my job because I was hatched. I was supervising Vista volunteers, and I couldn't continue working once I filed for office, so I couldn't put my salary into it. We put whatever savings we had, which were very minimal, into it. And, but on the other hand, I don't think people should be discouraged because they're not rich from running.
Well, yeah, and let me say something along that line, because I have to say that I was really pleased in that district, in spite of all the things that I've told you about, some of the problems that I ran into running for office, that I was 3rd out of 9 candidates, and the only thing that separated me from number 2 was about 200 votes. That was it. So it really meant something to see that many people cutting across all sorts of lines, because they did, to support me. And as for the actual costs, for that assembly race, the range in costs were from $30,000 to $75,000. Now, some of that is, of course, not recorded. Some of that's not recorded because it isn't properly accounted for. That's why I go so much along with Kathy about the idea of changing the method of financing campaigns. Now, personally, I couldn't put my entire salary in it,
But when I say I had to commit my entire salary, I'm talking about the costs of trying to take care of the things that you have to take care of at home while you're out campaigning and doing all these things. You have to pay actually a salary of somebody to take care of your house and all of these things. But in actual cash dollars, I am still at least $5,000 in debt. This is money that I've just got to pay back because it's money that I, in a sense, borrowed from people and made a commitment to pay back. Now, that's not mentioning the money that I took out and have directly paid into the campaign. And even with all of that in mind, I had over $26,000 contributed by one source to my campaign, through various labor groups and just outright campaign contributions from people in the community. That added up to over $26,000. So that just gives you some idea of the money. And we're talking about one assembly seat out of all the assembly seats that we have. So.
I always hate to say the figures on my races, but each of my two races took approximately $32,000. That's there are 200,000 people living in the district. As I say, these were both hotly fought races. We raised quite a bit of money through mailings because there were a lot of people who were in. We had very hot issues and deep concern, and we could get a remarkable response. At that, my family went into debt quite heavily on the first one. We were able to get it back because I won by having testimonial dinners and this kind of thing. I would have to say that I have a very supportive husband, both financially and time-wise, and we put $5,000 of family money into it, the first race, and as I say, beyond that we went into debt, and we had very good community response besides. The people who are working to get the initiative on that they're talking about are the Common Cause Organization, League of Women Voters, and some other groups. And I do think this is one of the most major steps that has to be taken, and California is a state that can do it.
Well, to begin with, what we tried to do, there was a $180 filing fee for Board of Education, $700 for mayor, and I don't know exactly what it was for the council district, but it was in between that figure. We had 9 candidates running. So we appealed to the committee to democratize the election laws. It's a nationwide, it's called CODEL, a nationwide organization to go to court to strike off these restrictions along with the age restriction. We had one candidate that was running for Board of Education, a 17-year-old student who was barred from running for Board of Education. Now, we felt it was very important for a student to be on the Board of Education. So along with that, we tried to strike off those 2 requirements. We were successful partly. I wasn't successful. I had to pay $180 to be on the ballot. But the $700 filing fee for mayor was stricken off in this particular race. So that was the first problem that we approached. The second one was that we realized that we weren't going to be able to get out of our own personal finances, considering I couldn't give up my job. I had no means of support. I didn't have a family. I borrowed $25 from my mother. I mean, I heard Joe Wax borrowed $25,000 from his mother, so that's a comparison. We realized we weren't going to be able to go to individual rich citizens in the city and get substantial amounts of money. I mean, our campaign was not going to appeal to Dorothy Chandler or people that run this city. Our campaign was going to appeal to blacks, Chicanos, women who are usually poor. I mean, that's the reason that we're present. That's the reason we're fighting. One of the reasons. So what we did was we had campaign parties. We asked for funds. We spoke to people, and we asked for money, and we got quite a response. Now, it was a limited response. Nobody gave us $26,000. I wish they had. I think we would have got a lot more votes, because unfortunately, that's part of getting votes in this system is you've got to have an awful lot of money to run a campaign, to get on the radio, to get on the TV, to get into the newspapers even. You've got to own a newspaper. I mean, there are a lot of things that go into winning an election, and that's what we were trying to change. And one little small step in that direction was the CODEL fight, to change the election laws in California and nationwide, and that fight is still going on. There are more ridiculous restrictions in other states than even a $700 filing fee. And I'd just like to mention what the city clerk said to me as far as the filing fee. He said, if you don't have a filing fee for these offices, you're going to have every crackpot in the city running for office. So I said, well, what do you mean? Now you can have every rich crackpot in the city running for office. Well, initially $180 to file, and then there was an awful lot in terms of publicity. And since I was on a slate of 9 candidates, it was, times 9 is what we actually spent. I don't know the exact figure, but it was an awful lot of money, and it came out of a lot of hard work and people who supported our campaign. And it wasn't any sizable amount from one particular person. That's what I was trying to mention also, that I wasn't able to quit my job, so that meant that I was living like a double life during the whole campaign.
I would like to address this question to all of you. So many of us who are trying to organize local caucuses of national Women's Political Caucus, find that we have a great deal of difficulty attracting a broad spectrum of women, economically, racially, and so forth. There is a certain feeling among black women that we have fought the battle for our men for so long, we should withdraw and let them do the job. Now, how are we going to overcome that? We're having a hard time appealing to black women on this level.
Do you mean in terms of becoming involved and contributing? I think that probably you're going to find it's going to be a continual fight, but one of the ways that you can begin to appeal to them is by making them realize, as I've tried to mention today, that the problems that face them face so many of us as women and face so many of us as blacks that they have to become involved. The fact is, they're right about the black male. They are taking leadership, but black women have a great deal to offer in terms of, being able to see the picture from this vantage point. And trying to, what it really amounts to is you've got to educate them that they need to let themselves be heard. They have to be heard. And that takes a full-time commitment. And all I got to say is every one of us that comes to a group like this has to go away and try to share, if we've gotten positive things out of this, to go and share it with other women that we see who didn't come today, but who maybe will come the next time they have a conference of this type, or who maybe will read when these things are written up in articles. I mean, they're constantly reporting on the fact that women are the largest voting majority in this country, and that we have to have somebody responsible to us for the vote that we give them. That's really what it amounts to.
I think that issues are a good basis for attraction too. The issue of equal pay, of how a woman can work and with having children. I think that women will be drawn through issues. I'd like to point out one other thing too, and that is that Yvonne Brathwaite Burke is not here today, but she really has been a path blazer certainly for the three of us who happen to be very much overlapping in the districts in which we've worked. And Yvonne was elected to the Assembly District, and as she supported me when I ran for councilwoman in a very corresponding district, I was able to work for her as a congresswoman. And I found when I was running the first time and the second time, the fact that she'd been a competent legislator did more for me than almost anything else. And I think that kind of feeling is important and will come through.
Yeah, I'd like to direct my question to Mrs. Russell. In your rap, you said that there were 2 things that you wanted to work on. One was the Centers for Children, and the other was getting better rights for police women. Now, what I was wondering for the first question is, are you willing to deal with what happens to the women once they're freed to work, like in a factory? Are you willing to fight for their rights in a factory, in an office? Now, you say you want to work for policewomen's rights.
The answer is yes, I am.
Okay, well, this is leading up. You say you want to work for policewomen's rights. That was the only one that you wanted to deal with. Is noble, but a little bit sinister to me.
Excuse me, just let me say that there were two. I was asked to say something about women's issues.
Okay.
I just want to say that there are two that are very lively right now. This was my approach. Very lively right now in City Council. One is child care, one is police women. That's why I picked the two. They're not the only ones I'm working on or the only ones I'm interested in. I was just trying to highlight two that are happening. Go ahead.
Well, you said in your talk that you didn't want to associate, like yourself, with any other women's, the aspects of the women's movement. You said right in the beginning, you said all you wanted to deal with was the Centers for Children and the policewomen, like the policewomen's equal rights. You were disassociating yourself with the rest of the women's movement.
Excuse me, if I did not intend to say that. If I came through, then let me reshape what I intended to say to you, which is namely that I really want to deal with the issues as human beings. That I think, for instance, that child care as an issue is terribly important to our civilization, because I think, number one, it means the care and development of children, which I think is the heart of what we're up against. And I think it's a mistake to say this is essentially a woman's issue, because I think it is a woman's and a man's issue, and we have to look at it as central to our society. I am proud to be part of women's organizations and have been. I was the first endorsed candidate of the local now, and I hope I respond well. I work with the Women's Center. It means a great deal to me. I said what I said merely to say that I think we cannot just say this issue is women's and women have got to do it. I think they're broader than that.
Whatever.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would just like to mention, too, that when I was campaigning, that Pat Russell, whose district overlapped somewhat with the district that I was running in, really worked in every way that she could to broaden the support in her area of influence for me, and that included raising money for me from people who were her financial supporters, which is a very hard thing for someone to do, because to ask for money on behalf of someone else, and to spend her time and her weekend evenings coming to fundraising events, and also to sign a letter on behalf of a woman running for office. So I can personally testify to her more than generous and gracious commitment in that respect. And I just wanted to add, because no one is asking a question about it, that if we're all here and we're all kind of agonizing together about women getting into politics, that right now in Los Angeles City, we have two good women who are running for citywide office, and Pat Russell made some reference to them. One of which would be a second woman on the city council, Joy Pikus, running in the San Fernando Valley. She really needs our support. I mean, she really needs us to go out and walk a precinct for her. She really needs us to put a couple of dollars in an envelope and send it to her. And the same is true for Diane Watson, who is in a runoff for a school board and would be the second woman on the Los Angeles City School Board. And both of whom are wonderful, competent, articulate women, and really need our support now. So instead of all of us agonizing about women in the political system in the future, I think we should feel some sense of commitment to do something about what's going on now, so that we don't have Joy Pikus coming and talking next year about what it was like to have almost won.
I'd like to address my question. I guess this isn't working, is it? Yeah. Oh, it is? Okay. I'd like to address my question to Pat Russell. Robin Morgan was here on Monday, and she said, among other things, that she thought the main issue for 1973 is rape. Now, I disagree with that personally, but I do think in terms of the police that it's a question that needs to be gone into, and I was wondering how you would feel about suggesting in terms of police women that when rape victims come to the police station, they be interrogated by women as opposed to men, since she brought out a great deal of the fact that police men often made very derogatory and degrading statements to women who came in as rape victims?
The issue of rape, I think, is a serious issue for society as well as for women. And the recommendation that there be police women available in a station when a woman goes in is an important one. I've discussed this with our police women who feel very strongly about it themselves and have gone through some of the problems. It is a trauma for a woman, and she needs some immediate response. The policewoman that I first talked with about this pointed out to me that because police women have been cut back, you cannot count on finding a woman on duty any night of the week, any place in the city. And this is one reason for having more police women. I think also the attitude is. Now, the policewoman said to me she had never seen a policeman be anything but professional in his attitude. I have had personal testimony that's different from that. But her feeling was very definitely that women should be on hand to receive. Now, Venice Division is in my district. I think we have a cooperative captain. This issue has come up publicly. I think he's addressed himself to it well. He said he would be glad to go to the Women's Center and talk with them, and they told him that he wasn't welcome to come there, but they'd be glad to go and talk to him. And this is happening. I am working with them on a commission. In addition to the problem with police, there are medical problems. The way a woman is treated when she gets to a hospital or to a doctor, and sometimes is as bad and worse as when she gets to the police. Also, the legislation under which rape cases are tried is archaic and inhuman. And there are bills coming up in this session being introduced to change the legislation on rape. For instance, the instructions a judge has to give to a jury in a rape case. And I can't give you the numbers of the bills, but we'll be working on them. Pardon? AB 61 was thrown out. Okay. But if one gets killed, there will be others, because we do have some legislators who are aware and strong on this. And one of the things I can do as a councilman in office is to work to get city support in Sacramento on some of these things, and I'll be doing that.
I'd like to ask a question. To Ms. McAlpin Grant, do you find that the women that are graduating from law school are having a tougher time finding jobs? In other words, is discrimination on the increase or on the decrease, or is it just nothing's happening?
Well, I do find that the women are having a very difficult time finding jobs. The legal profession, though we vow to uphold the Constitution, have been very negligent in carrying out our responsibilities. We have approximately 270,000 lawyers in the United States, and there are approximately 8,500 women in the profession. Only 1% of all of our judges, federal judges, are women. Only about 8% of all of our university law professors are women. We only have approximately 3 women in positions of deans of law schools in the California area. 1 is a dean and 2 assistant deans. We have 1 judge on the Court of Appeals. We don't have any women on our Supreme Court in California. We have 1 woman in the Ninth Circuit for the federal districts. We have approximately 2% on the municipal court and superior court in California, and the figures are even more devastating in other areas, other cities and other states. And in the practice, because of the Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, there has been a great deal of consciousness raising on the part of the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, in the sense of considering law firms as possible candidates for prosecution for failure to conform with equal opportunity. However, because so many firms have less than 25 employees, they have generally been able to avoid being prosecuted. Now it's becoming more and more the concern of women lawyers, and women lawyers are beginning to take action through the American Bar Association and through the State Bar to see to it that the law firms are committed. Also, the law schools, we at Loyola have a policy that if a particular firm comes to our door and says that they have a policy of discriminating against women or any other group, that they are not going to be allowed to interview with our top people. They will be asked to leave. I even had an incident where that occurred, and I was there, and I asked them to leave because of the fact that this particular woman had gone in to interview, and then they politely told her there was no need because they weren't interested in hiring a woman. This kind of thing has been happening in the legal profession, and even though, as I said, the 1964 Civil Rights Act called attention to it, a lot of the firms are merely giving lip service by hiring their one female. Sometimes they're lucky they have their one black female, or and though so they carry two in one. Or sometimes they may even be luckier and they'll have 3 in 1. She may be a black, or she may be a Chicana, and she'll be a woman, and she'll also be Jewish or something like that. Anyway, they get them all in one group, and that way the firm has done its job. See, and then nobody can criticize, because in order to prove a case of racial discrimination, you have to show that they haven't made any attempt to try and put a person in a position who's qualified. I have heard very often that a number of the firms are meeting together, and they're finding out that women could be partners, that they do have the capacity to run an office just like any male does. And so now they're beginning to allow associates to become partners in firms. Give us a little time, and I think we will uphold the Constitution as we committed ourselves to.
Okay, if there's no further questions, I'll end this panel, but I want to remind you that at 3 o'clock there's a panel on the state of the movement, Women in Politics and Revolution. It's going to be in the second